Getting tough on Iran, but maybe not tough enough yet. US and Russia have now reached a compromise on the Iranian nuclear issue, but as yet no conclusions on a future course. Is Iran complying with international requirements? Are other pending issues between Moscow and Washington likely to become bargaining chips in the wider Iranian debate? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sahil Rahman. It was Hillary Clinton's first visit to Moscow as the US Secretary of State. She met with leading politicians and human rights groups. It was hoped that Clinton's visit would help add momentum to the bilateral relations between the two countries. Observers say Clinton was looking for a solid commitment from her Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, on the Iranian nuclear issue, but didn't get one there, as Neha Tucker reports.
Hillary Clinton in Russia, building bridges and rallying support. The US Secretary of State has had a series of meetings which began with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and ended with President Dmitry Medvedev. They say they've managed to make some progress on issues of common interest. As expected, Iran's nuclear ambitions dominated the discussions.
We want to resolve all issues connected with Iran's nuclear program in a way that the country is able to fully enjoy its rights as a non-nuclear member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and take advantage of all the ensuing opportunities in the field of peaceful nuclear power engineering. At the same time, the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons should not be allowed to be violated.
While the US is willing to negotiate, it has been very keen to impose heavier sanctions on Iran, with backing from Russia.
We believe that Iran is entitled to peaceful nuclear energy, but that it is not entitled to nuclear weapons. Russia agrees with us on that. At the same time that we are very vigorously pursuing this track, we are aware that we might not be as successful as we need to be. So we have always looked at the potential of sanctions in the event that we are not successful, that we cannot assure ourselves and others that Iran has decided not to pursue nuclear weapons.
Moscow enjoys strategic ties with Iran. It sold the country billions of dollars worth of arms and helped build Iran's first civilian nuclear reactor. It is widely believed that the US is looking for Russian support in return for its decision to scrap the controversial missile defense shield in Eastern Europe. Both sides say they're expecting to renew the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty that expires at the end of 2009. They've also agreed to work closely on resolving the worsening situation in Afghanistan and Pakistan. But the two countries do not see eye to eye on some key issues. Washington has heavily criticized Moscow for recognizing the independence of Georgia's breakaway regions. It has also repeatedly urged Russia to respect human rights. These issues could prove to be major stumbling blocks in the warming of relations between the US and Russia, and could heavily impact the level of cooperation between the two countries. Neha Tucker for Inside Story.
Well, joining me today are my guests in Moscow, Alexander Pakiev, who is at the Institute of World Economy and International Relations and an advisor to the State Duma. In Tehran, Syed Mohammad Mirandi, professor at Tehran University. And in Washington, Richard Weitz, senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to Inside Story. Can I come to you first, Alexander Pakiev, in Moscow? Analysts continue and have been saying for the moment that the closeness of Russia and the United States is getting, well, better, to put it in no uncertain terms, with regards to Iran. How close do you think this relationship really is?
Well, probably yesterday was a very good day for the US-Russian relations, and one influential senator here, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, even said that probably we're witnessing a start of a long-term strategic alliance between Russia and the United States. Regarding particular question of Iran, Secretary Clinton said that the positions of Russia, the United States and China have become closer. Also, Minister Lavrov said that positions actually coincided. Both Russia and the United States are interested to have to maintain Iran as a non-nuclear nation, which observes, complies with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and at the same time, Iran has the right to use benefits of peaceful nuclear energy, as it is permitted by the Article 4 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. At this moment, there is no need on sanctions. Both sides agree because Iranian demonstrated flexibility. New serious talks will be open later this month.
Sure.
IAEA's inspectors would go to uranium enrichment facility, and there are hopes that the process would go forward with the direct participation of the United States during such negotiations. It's an important difference from the previous situation, and only in a hypothetical situation, if Iran would continue aggressively denounce the UN Security Council resolutions, well, we might think about some sticks, and probably in this case, as President Medvedev said, Russian President Medvedev, sanctions might be inevitable.
Well, indeed, that might be. And I think you've touched on various issues that we're also going to be touching in this next half hour. Richard Weiss, of course, is it all rhetoric from the politicians, or do you get a sense in Washington that both Moscow and Washington are becoming quite close on this issue of Iran and its nuclear development plan?
Well, I think that the countries have always had a complicated relationship. Both Russia and the United States share the same goal of preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons, but they've often differed on the tactics. The Russian government has been more comfortable allowing Iran to pursue nuclear energy and nuclear research that doesn't have a clear weapons purpose, whereas the United States has been somewhat cautious because it's very easy to transition from a civilian nuclear program to a weapons program. It's true that President Medvedev has indicated that he might accept additional sanctions if they're necessary, and both Secretary Clinton and Foreign Minister Lavrov indicated that that was not their preference. They would prefer to see a negotiated outcome, but beyond that, there's a little difference in tactic. The United States thinks that it would be helpful to have Iranians think that there might be additional sanctions if they do not continue to cooperate or show further cooperation with the international community. Whereas the Russian government, and this goes back to Putin when he was president, has been concerned that the stated claim is if you put this kind of pressure on Iran, it's going to have a negative effect. It will cause them to become more aggressive, less cooperative. And so there's a disagreement over tactics. So the goals still are the same.
Sure. If we go to Tehran and to Said Morandi, welcome to the programme, Mr. Morandi. You've been listening to what our guests in Moscow and Washington have been saying, and obviously listening to what's been coming out of political leaders as well, their statements certainly. Do you think Washington is playing a psychological game perhaps? And how is Iran reacting to this statement and several statements that both Moscow and Washington are becoming closer on the Iran issue?
Well, I think the most important thing that one has to take into account is that regardless of the positions taken by the different countries in the 5+1, Iran is determined to continue with its peaceful nuclear program, which includes enriched uranium for peaceful purposes. And therefore, this is not something that Iran will negotiate, this right or the continued extension of this program in the coming months and years to come. It is important, though, for Iran to convince friendly countries that the way forward is cooperation and dialogue, and Iran is also willing to be open about the program itself. The problem that the Iranians face is that they're not quite sure about American intentions, whether the rhetoric coming from Washington is merely rhetoric or the United States is really intent on, or intends to change its attitude and its policies towards Iran.
But do you think then, sorry, Dr. Morandi, to interrupt, do you then think that Iran is concerned when they hear comments from President Medvedev when he says that he would consider moves that may implement sanctions towards Iran if there is no breakthrough on a peaceful resolution to this matter? Does that concern Tehran? Do you think it would concern the Iranian people?
Well, I think obviously the Iranians do not want additional sanctions, although any new sanctions will probably not have the amount of effect that the initial ones did. The most important was that on the banking sector, and Iran did overcome it. But I think that it is important for Iran to feel that Russia is a reliable partner, especially since the Russians themselves speak about a multipolar world economic condition in the years to come. It is important for the Russians to be able to take an independent position of their own and not to bow down to American pressure. For the Iranians, ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, relations between Iran and Russia had improved dramatically. But the last couple of years, for many Iranians and government officials as well, there have been questions about the extent to which the Russians are willing to remain a reliable partner.
Sure.
So I think the coming weeks and months will both reveal whether this is the path that the Russians will wish to take, and also whether the United States itself is willing to break from its past policies and to move towards rapprochement with Iran.
Well, Alexander Pakiev, in Moscow, Russia has much to consider, including the billions of dollars that it's invested in Iran. It has been a very big trading partner with the Iranians. I mean, sanctions, well, could that all be in jeopardy?
Well, actually, Russian-Iranian economic relations are not very big. We have just $2 billion foreign trade balance with Iran. It's peanuts. And Russian overall foreign trade balance is hundreds of billions of dollars. So economically, the relations are unfortunately not as developed as we want. We want to develop them further, but so far they unfortunately are not very big. I think Iranians have much bigger trade with Germany, much bigger investment from China, so that it is China and Germany which could lose much more than Russia economically. But for Russia, Iran indeed is a very important political partner. There is a considerable overlapping interest between Russia and Iran in very important areas, including South Caucasus, Central Asia, to an extent Afghanistan. Also, by the way, Iran is very important for the United States to assist, to facilitate peaceful and face-saving American retreat or American troops withdrawal from that country, so that Iran is important for Russia politically. Iran is important politically for the United States as well. And here there is, I think, a mutual interest in, from the United States, from Russia, and from Iran to find ways out from this regrettable situation, this nuclear dispute, which prevents sides from full-scale cooperation. And here reciprocal steps are needed, including Russia, the United States, and Iran as well.
Yeah, let me bring in Richard Weiss here, because it's quite interesting, Richard, that as we talk about the relationship between Iran, the USA, and Russia, perhaps we mustn't forget the role of the IAEA, and perhaps some commentators are suggesting in some of the media blogs on internet pages that isn't it for the IAEA to decide whether Iran is guilty or not guilty, and then for the international community to decide what action should be taken? How does the IAEA stand right at this moment in time as far as Washington is concerned?
Well, what you said, how you described it is precisely the Russian position. When President Medvedev was here in New York last month for the General Assembly, And many of the people in his entourage said that they would consider additional sanctions, but not just if Washington tells them that Iran is violating its commitments. It has to be done by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And as we know, the IAEA itself has had a very complex relationship with Iran. The IAEA has had a multi-year investigation and has still been unable to determine precisely what kind of nuclear activities Iran pursued in the past. There are questions about why a certain, for example, the recently discovered nuclear enrichment facility at Qum was not announced earlier. There's evidence that there was some kind of interest in nuclear explosive devices in the past. That said, the head of the IAEA, El-Baradei, has said that they have no conclusive evidence that Iran has a nuclear program. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence, but there's no clear evidence.
And of course, we'll have to wait most probably until October the 25th, until those inspectors go into Iran to see for themselves.
Well, it's actually more complicated. The problem is that Iran has signed on to the basic comprehensive safeguards, and that allows the IAEA to inspect any facility that Iran declares to the agency as a nuclear facility. Iran signed for a while in force, but has now stopped enforcing what's known as the additional protocol to those safeguards. The Iranian parliament still has not ratified it. What the additional protocol allows the IAEA to do is not only to go to sites that Iran declares to have nuclear facilities, but to go elsewhere. Because the fear in Washington has not been so much that Iran will somehow use the Bushehr reactor that Russia has been working with them, use the facility in Tanz where they're enriching uranium, and try and make nuclear fissile material, weapons-grade material there. The fear has always been that there's more sites like we found at Qum where these are covert sites which are actually taking the material and the knowledge that Iran is gaining in these open sites and making the weapons, but at a place that the IAEA does not know about because they're not being reported. So I think that, as the Iranian guest has said, I think that there's no way you can make Iran stop enriching uranium at this point. It's just gone too far.
Sure.
What we would like to see is more transparency, and that would require the IAEA to have the additional protocol so it can investigate anywhere to make sure that any of these nuclear activities, such as enrichment, are not part of a weapons program.
Well, let's bring our viewers up to speed with exactly how the IAEA sits, because in May, US President Barack Obama said he expected to know Iran's nuclear intentions by the end of this year, but in August he brought the deadline forward to September. So how much has Iran done to allay the concerns of the US since Obama took office? Now, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, is charged with keeping an eye on those nuclear developments, and in the past they've had difficulty accessing Iran's nuclear sites, as we've just mentioned, and gaining information from Tehran on its latest developments. But this year, as mentioned, Iran disclosed a new uranium enrichment plant near the city of Qom and said that the IAEA would have full access to it. In October, the IAEA said officials would be inspecting the new facility on October the 25th. And earlier this month, Iran apparently agreed to ship some of its uranium to Russia and France for processing. So it may seem that Tehran is cooperating, but there have been some conflicting reports over Iranian disclosure. The head of the IAEA has said there's no concrete proof that Iran is seeking to develop nuclear weapons capability. However, unnamed sources from within the IAEA are reported to be concerned that Iran has enriched enough uranium to make a probable atomic bomb. Saeed Mirandi, I mean, do you think the international community is possibly jumping the gun with talking about a contingency plan of sanctions when, in fact, the facts haven't been collated properly as far as, or to the satisfaction of both the Iranians, the US and the Soviets, the Russians, pardon me?
I think that the problem for the Iranians in general is that Western countries have in the past asked Iran to suspend the enrichment of uranium as well as to sign up to the additional protocol. While Iran wasn't legally bound to have the additional protocol worked out in the country and to have its facilities and other places in the country go under the additional protocol, but they decided to halt enrichment, and they also decided to accept the additional protocol for a period of time.
You know, we're talking about sanctions. I mean, surely Iran is worried. Surely it might even think at the moment that the Security Council is jumping the gun, as I said, before the IAEA have made any decisions and concrete conclusions about whether Iran is in a dangerous position. Yes or no?
Well, yes. Well, that's what I was getting at. Mr. Obama just recently said he had full confidence in Mr. al-Baradei. And Mr. al-Baradei has said repeatedly that there has never been any evidence whatsoever that Iran's program is anything but peaceful. But the problem that Iran faces, as in the past, is that it is facing the United States government, which has constantly threatened the country with military strikes and sanctions. And that is not going to achieve a positive response from inside Iran. The reason why Iran built a second installation, and it was not secret, Iran announced it within the laws of the International Atomic Energy Agency organization, is because the United States was constantly threatening Iran with military strikes, and the same was true with Israel. Any other country which would have been threatened like Iran has been with military strikes would have taken the issue to the UN Security Council, and those countries that had threatened the country would have been condemned. But Iran is constantly and repeatedly threatened with military attacks, and the only thing that it could have done in response was to build another installation so safe and secure that the threat of military strikes would have gone away.
Fine. Well, we'll see.
So
we'll see what the
IAEA.
Sorry, Mr. Morandi, to interrupt you. We're coming nearly to the end of the programme. I do want to get Moscow and Washington back in here. Regarding the threats, Mr. Pakiev, and very quickly, if the IAEA come out of Iran after the inspection and says Iran is fine, there's no problem there, and the country comes out smelling like flowers, if that's a phrase I can use, do you think America stop picking on Iran?
Well, in what I'm absolutely confident, if the IAEA would come to a conclusion that Iran is fine, well, I believe the problem would be settled, and we in Moscow won't see anymore any reason for having sanctions in force against Iran introduced by the UN Security Council resolutions, and the sanctions should be removed. No obstacle would exist anymore for the Russian-Iranian cooperation, at least in many areas, which are now restricted by the US objections and the UN Security Council resolutions.
Mr. Weitz in Washington, D.C., would you agree with that? Do you think that will happen if Iran is given a clean bill of health?
Well, it depends. As I said, the problem is that the IAEA, they're limited what they can do. They're a technical agency. So their conclusion is they have no explicit proof that Iran has a nuclear program. They have evidence that there was these past nuclear-related activities. And al-Baradei, who was cited previously, has said it's his feeling, he said this in public, that Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapons option. He just can't prove it. So even with the certificate of health, as it's put, you might see an end to additional efforts to impose sanctions. You might see a rollback of some of the UN sanctions, but there are a lot of sanctions to be put into place in the part of the United States, Europe, et cetera, which I don't think would be removed that easily. There are some other issues that they have with Iran that they would also want to see resolved, related to terrorism and regional security issues as well.
Well, we shall see what happens in the coming days, and certainly by the end of October. Gentlemen, thank you to Alexander Pekiev in Moscow, to Saeed Mirandi in Tehran, and Richard Weitz in Washington. Gentlemen, thank you, and thank you for joining me on this edition of Inside Story. We'll be back again very shortly, so do take care. Bye-bye.